Hi there, I'm Christopher Paul Jones, Harley Street therapist, and I'm here today talking to Olivia James, also a Harley Street therapist. How are you doing today?
Hi, Chris. I'm pretty groovy.
Good, good. So today we're going to talk about how we work with clients and sort of why it may be different than other things people have come across. So for you, what's the first thing you do when looking to work with a client?
The first thing is I establish a rapport as quick as I possibly can, and safety. I want the person to feel as safe as possible with me, because if they don't feel safe, the detective work that's involved in the therapeutic process, certainly for me, becomes much more difficult. Person has to feel comfortable enough for me to like have a look around and see what's really going on, and feel safe enough that they can trust me and tell me things that they need to tell me.
Yeah, I mean, I think rapport is one of the most important things. Actually, it's something that doesn't like, it gets talked about in sort of trainings, but the importance of it, what the difference it makes in connecting to people, I think is it's like, you know, they spend an hour talking about it when really it's kind of the whole thing.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, for me, I think rapport is a high one. I think the other thing is what you call sensory acuity, which is the ability to read the person as well, to know exactly what's going on for them, because so much of what a client will give you isn't what they say. You know, the very difference between going, yeah, I'm fine. I mean, these are obvious. There's never this obvious, but yeah, I'm fine. And hey, yeah, I'm fine, you know, and obviously it's normally a lot more subtle than that, because people don't want to give away their things. So, yeah. So where do you go from there? So you gain rapport. What do you think is the key difference between you and, say, a counselor?
Well, I think the key difference probably is that I have, and I know you do too, like a lot of tools at my disposal. Mm-hmm. So one of the things a counselor does is really, they talk and they get the person to talk, and they talk about their feelings, and there is definitely a place for that. But then sometimes once the problem's been identified, talking about it alone, in my experience, isn't the fastest way to help the person actually release it and like pop it. Yeah. So you and I both work in similar ways, I think. So we work often on neutralizing things. So for example, if somebody has a phobia or a fear, a certain thing in the environment will trigger a response in them. That's a nervous system response where somehow their nervous system reacts as though there is a serious physical danger often. Yeah. So what I do, and I think what you do as well, is we use different techniques to interrupt that, to stop that association with the thought of going on a plane and the person reacting as though they're in mortal danger, and you know, the whole body goes into fight, flight, freeze, or what I call freak out mode. Yes. And basically what we're trying to stop is the person going into freak out mode. So that's really where I think I differ from what a counselor would do.
Yeah, I think the problem, and again, it's not a criticism of any particular method, because they all have their place. I mean, the two issues I see for people who have just done counseling is, one, it's very surface. So you can talk about, go, oh, you know, why am I, let's say the example of a phobia or a trauma, you go, well, why am I this way? And you might spend 4 or 5 sessions finding the root cause. But just because you realize that the reason you're scared of flying is because you got trapped in a car when you were little, doesn't change the fact that you're scared, because
exactly,
intellect and emotion are two very different things.
Very true.
And you know, and the other thing is, you know, people are sort of educated. You know, spiders in England can't hurt you. You know, flying is completely safe. But that's all, again, it's intellectual, and the emotional, that fight, flight, or freeze, as you say, that freak out mode is primeval. And as far as your unconscious mind is concerned, you're ready for battle. Yes. You're ready to fight. You're ready to play dead. You're ready to run away. And so talking isn't necessarily the thing. You have to get to that deeper, that emotional cause.
Exactly.
And as you say, you have a lot of methods of doing that.
So. Yeah. Another thing for people to understand probably is helpful as well. So that trauma, especially traumatic memories that are encoded in a part of the brain that's kind of older than the bit where language is processed. So my background is in linguistics. So Broca's area is where our language is processed and used. And that part has really very little to do with trauma. So with all these things, what you have to try and find a way is to connect the two. So by talking, you can definitely get to the problem. And so by a client coming to me or to you, they talk about the problem, and it's a way for them to explain like what the problem is. But then we have to go actually deeper. So we both have various different techniques where we sort of interrupt that pattern, don't we?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So there are eye movement techniques, for example, that I use. I used one quite yesterday, for example, with a client. Also, I've got this really cool, I love this bilateral stimulation using a juggling ball.
Oh, one time to the other, yes?
Yes, they're brilliant, and it feels really good. So there are lots of different ways where you can use the body, and the person can think about the problem and they could talk about the problem while using some kind of physical process.
Yes.
Whether it's you doing a version of an eye movement technique, or whether it's them doing some sort of tapping technique or a movement technique, all these things help to actually get to where the problem is.
Yes.
Where the problem is actually encoded, the structure of the problem.
Yes, so I think some people, when they come across sort of these bilateral stimulation techniques, the EMDR blast, IEMT, these kind of things, they seem bizarre when people see them. So it's just like, like I've got videos where they're just clicking the pen and they're following a light, and they're like, well, how did the person get better? Or I've done demonstrations. I mean, what is the science behind that from your perspective? What is it that makes that by going from left to right is taking out that emotional connection, that charge?
So there are various different theories. So the research isn't conclusive. So one of the working theories is that by crossing the corpus callosum, which is the bit that basically your brain's got two hemispheres, and it's obviously a lot more complicated. I think having two hemispheres is a physical thing, but also it's a useful model for understanding how different parts of the brain do different tasks.
Yes, well, the old analogy of the left and right brain, isn't it?
Exactly.
Oh, I'm left brain, I'm right brain, I'm more
yes.
It's
things are a lot more complicated than that, but the principle is that it's the corpus callosum. But also, basically, what happens is I think this bilateral stimulation seems to loosen the way that the memory is stored. So there's a theory that perhaps it has a calming effect on the amygdala, which is your fight flight it's your smoke alarm in your brain. Yeah. There is another theory that it actually changes the way the memories are stored in your hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that deals with a lot of memories. Yeah. We probably the most famous, there's some really interesting stories about, we're both in London. So, the taxi drivers, the black taxi drivers have to do a thing called the knowledge. And it turns out that people who are successful taxi drivers, their hippocampus, the part of the brain that deals with memory, is actually bigger. And it actually gets smaller when they stop being a taxi driver, which is fascinating, a little fascinating aside. So
I was going to say that's an interesting one, because I guess in order to hold all the directions and the
yes, exactly.
I'd be interested to know how it is now with sat navs, if that part of the brain is a lot less.
Yes, I think they still have to have the knowledge, but the bilateral stimulation, there's a theory that it sort of loosens, the memory, the kind of certainly the intensity of it. So you and I will have both worked with clients that have had a traumatic memory that's at the roots of their current phobia or anxiety. Once we've treated that memory with whatever technique we choose to use, they can often still remember that this thing happened, right? So they can still remember the time when they went completely blank in front of an audience and it was, but it doesn't, they don't feel as cringy about it. They can still remember it, and it's like, well, all right, it happened. Or even like a violent attack or something. It's still, they can still remember it, but the intensity, the emotional intensity isn't quite the same.
Yes.
Which is what these movements do. So I think somehow they calm the system. You know, the tension isn't quite there, and the danger. So I think it actually probably also affects the amygdala a lot. So the memory's still there, but it doesn't bother them in the same way.
Yes. Well, I think, and my mind went completely blank. I think it's great for memory. That's the other thing. Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think what happens is people come for a session, and they, you know, especially because, you know, one of my methods is hypnotherapy, and people have a massive misunderstanding of how that works. You know?
Yeah.
They're thinking, oh, you're going to go 3 to 1, you're a chicken, or 3 to 1, your problem's gone, you know, and a lot of people with anxiety don't like that because they'll feel they'll be out of control.
Yes.
Now, all we're doing is getting the emotional mind and the logical mind to talk to each other. But yeah, people have a misinterpretation that they'll forget the traumatic memory. It's not that they'll forget the memory, it's that the emotional charge, which actually doesn't serve you, holding on to it from the past. When you clear that, you can get the learning. So as you say, it's almost like they're disassociated. They're like, they can see it, but it just feels I'm slightly detached from that. I used to be right in it, seeing it all from my own eyes.
Yeah.
I'm disconnected. And I think certainly in the techniques I do, that's the big thing. Anything that's sort of self-soothing or does some form of cross-lateral stimulation or changes that stimulus, changes the emotional intensity, those 3 things of disassociate you seem to be the most effective ways in making rapid change.
Yeah.
And that's why when you get some of the trigger points, you can make change very, very quickly.
I know. And then people will say, oh, but I thought, you know, I've been working on this for years, and you and I know that sometimes we can just fix it in like a minute.
Yes.
And it's mind-blowing. And we call that, in the trade, we call that a 1-minute wonder. It doesn't always happen, but
no.
But when it does, I think also for people, when it's happened to them, they kind of feel really like, well, but I've already tried years of this other stuff and it just hasn't worked, and it can be really frustrating for them to know that it was that easy to fix it.
Sure. Well, that sometimes comes back to we talked about this in other videos, what you call secondary gain, which is the benefit for the problem. Now, the idea of saying you have a benefit problem, but everything is meeting a need at the subconscious level, you wouldn't be doing it. So most common with fears is some form of protection, safety, avoidance.
Yes,
you know?
exactly.
And now, of course, if people can't get, you know, so sometimes if it's that easy to change, then it must not be significant. And somehow I was making it up, you know. So sometimes people want to hold on to it because they believe it somehow, it makes it more significant. It's like people who you see meeting each other, arguing for who has the worst life. And it's like, you know, people arguing for their misery. It's always a fascinating, oh, you think you've got it tough. Well, I have it this. It's like, well, why are you arguing for how bad it is? How is that helpful? You know?
Exactly. Well, I think for many people that becomes part of their identity. And
yes, absolutely.
Certainly when I did my trauma training, my supervisor called it the Trauma Olympics, where somebody would come into a group setting and just basically let everybody know that their trauma was the worst and nobody could even come close, so they better not even try. And then it becomes part of their identity.
Yes.
And it can be really problematic because, especially where somebody's suffered serious abuse, like a rape or a sexual assault, or serious, like a years of like emotional abuse, like letting go of that can be really, really difficult because it, like, somehow in their brain it's like, well, if I let go of this, that means that somehow maybe it was all right what this person did to me, and of
Yes.
course it isn't. But this becomes a big problem with people who have been through that kind of trauma, and I've seen it many times. You probably have too, right?
Yeah. Well, it doesn't. I mean, it often is trauma, but it's sometimes, for whatever that fear, that anxiety went in deep, and instead of being seen as a pattern of behavior, we were kind of talking about this a little bit earlier before we filmed. Instead of seeing it just as a pattern of behavior or a wrongly learned pattern, they're starting to see it as part of who they are.
Yes,
and,
exactly.
Yeah, again, but certainly if they've been through some kind of abuse, you're right. One of the secondary gains is, or just they wanted their, like bulimia or anorexia. I need my parents to notice me, or I need someone to notice me. I need to, and it's, again, this is all subconscious. No one's sitting there saying this, but these patterns, these beliefs are running the show. And it's the same. Yeah, I can't forgive this person. And it's like, well, you don't let go of your fear because that person has moved up. That person doesn't know what they did, or it doesn't care. And the only thing you gain by holding on to it is keeping yourself stuck.
Yeah.
But as I say before,
that's easier said than done, right?
Oh, sure. Yes. Well,
and that's a very intellectual way of looking at things.
You have to get to the emotion, as we're talking about. Yeah.
Exactly.
So they have to, I mean, sometimes, I mean, of course, most people don't realize they're doing this because the subconscious isn't making logical, rational decisions.
No.
So it's connecting, which is why, again, talking about it, you wouldn't always get to this. But when you do, I guess, what I would call hypnotic techniques, you can actually start getting communication from the unconscious, and it will start giving you these reasons. Normally when it realizes, I mean, this is the big thing, even in sort of intervention therapies, people that do what I do, when I have people who have tried hypnotherapy and stuff and all these kind of things and still not got the result, but they do with me. And that's not to say I have all the answers, but the one thing is the secondary gain hasn't been dealt with. So they've dealt with the core of the issue. They haven't dealt with the belief that's behind that. And when you get to talk to the unconscious and get it to realize that the very reason it's holding on to is normally the very thing it's holding you back from, it will normally learn new ways of being. But you're right, there's a big difference. And the other thing is there's a big difference between a systemic issue, i.e. a prolonged feeling of stress, and a trigger issue, which is a phobia. And knowing the difference, they're not completely different in how you tackle them, but they are different in the beliefs that are going to be behind them. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. That makes sense. And for different clients, that needs to be done at a different pace as well.
Absolutely, yes.
Now, some people I work with have never had any kind of coaching or therapy ever. So I sometimes with those people, I need to go a little bit more slowly for them to start like trusting the process.
Yes.
And like often, we'll do like a little sample. We'll try a technique on something a little bit minor, don't we? Sometimes.
Yes.
We'll just say, let's try this on something that annoyed you on the way to the therapy room or whatever, like, so with some people that's a slightly different process than with people who have had a lot of therapy, who are totally like, who you have immediate like rapport, they trust you, then you can go kind of much faster.
Yeah. Do you find, I mean, I would say you're right to a point. I would say sometimes I have had, like, I used to make a joke when people who were trained in like traditional, like Freudian analysis came to see me, I'll go, right, you're double, because they're actually sometimes harder because their method, they're so used to being in their head that actually tapping into their emotions, they were not only worse than someone who hadn't done it before. Yeah, they were worse than someone who hadn't done it before. Because you're trying to analyze it rather than just.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
But you are right. If they've had no experience at all of this kind of thing, it can be
of anything. And bearing in mind, most of the time, the kinds of things you and I do are quite, in a way, even though we're like based in Harley Streets, a lot of the stuff we do is relatively sort of avant-garde, isn't it? Let's face it.
I'd like to call it cutting edge, but
exactly.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes
cutting edge.
Yeah, if I realize the client's quite analytical, I'll almost make a joke of it. I'll go, right, here comes the new agey bit. But anyway, here we go. And normally they'll laugh and
I usually ask them, I'll just say, will you just indulge me in this one? Just humor me. Will you just go along with this? And then they do, and they go, oh yeah.
Yeah, well, that's what I say. Like when you certainly like, so going back to the eyes or any technique that's very fast, sometimes people will come out and they'll be like, where's the problem? They're like, I can't find it. And it's like, that's a good thing, isn't it? And they're like, yeah, but it was, and then they'll start trying to make excuse, and then they'll be like, yeah, it's gone, but I don't know what you did. And I was like, well, does it really matter? I mean, I can give you the science, but does it matter if I told you to stand on your head for 10 minutes and it worked? Would it matter why it worked? You know,
or they'll be like, well, I can't really think about it now, you know, and you just know that's
a prime one. So how do you feel? 0 to 10, how strong? So you've got the issue, 10, do whatever the process is. And we can talk about them later maybe, but we've covered a few. Where is it now? I can't find it. But, I'm not very good at connecting to emotions. It's like, but you were 5 minutes ago. Oh yeah. No, that's weird. And so you always have to remind them that they had the problem in the first place.
Definitely.
Like,
although so we're talking about the subjective units of distress, the SUDs, right?
Yes,
so the number.
So for people who don't know technical, that
basically
means how strong is the emotion?
How bad is it? How bad is it? So right now, how that your like fear of ice cream, how strong is it? As you're thinking about it now. And then, but sometimes when I do that technique, I just want to show the person the technique. I'm not really interested often in the numbers so much, because the numbers can become a bit of a game. Do you know what I mean? And I just say to them, look, just think about this. Let's pick a thing, something that upset you, and let's just do the technique. I'm not overly worried about the numbers.
No, it's, I think the numbers are, well, and I often say that to clients, say, look, I'm not measured. There's no,
there's no wrong answer either.
Yeah. 5 for you might be 5 different for somebody else. And some people are underestimate, some people are overestimate, but it's good to know. I think it's good. Something like that is to know which way it's moving.
Yes.
I have known someone who said, instead of doing numbers, if they're very kinesthetic, squeeze my hand for how hard, I don't know if you can do that at the moment, actually, squeeze my hand for how intense the emotion is, but you probably can't do that right now anyway. No. So there's other ways, but it's just, all it is so people have a check-in with themselves in which way it's going.
Exactly.
And
but even when they've had like a breakthrough, sometimes they're like, well, I can't really think about it now. So even then they are still like
it's always in the testing.
Unwilling to say, actually, bloody hell, that was amazing. It really worked.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things on that though, that is normally a sign of someone who has a lot of anticipatory anxiety.
Oh, of course, I know.
So they're going, I can't find it now, or I feel okay now, and my line for that is always, so you're planning on feeling bad later then?
Yes, exactly.
And they're like, well, no, but I might do. Is going, well, 2 things there. If you're feeling good now and you're feeling bad later, something has changed. Something has changed. So in order to feel how we do, we have a pattern of thinking, believing, feeling, picturing, and so we change that recipe. We change how we feel. So obviously, in the moment, if we think about our most embarrassing moment, if I ask someone to think about that right now, they'll probably go back there. If I say, well, think of your best kiss, now they'll probably go back there, unless they're sort of away from motivated, in which case they'll think of the best kiss and then think of the breakup. But either so, they'll normally, they'll think of a happy time. Without leaving that chair, your mind has done something. And so it's realizing that that's what we're doing all the time. So if someone's going, well, I might feel bad later, you're running this anticipatory anxiety. They're running a movie of the what if, and so they're imagining something that hasn't happened yet and imagining it worst case scenario. And one of the things to do then is work on that fear of the future. And I think that's certainly the difference between what I would call anxiety, although there's a crossover, and a specific phobia, because you also need to, so you deal with the past, the triggers, you deal with the subconscious beliefs, but you also need to deal with the fear of the future and that what if. So it's sometimes a sign that actually that's something to look at, but also yeah, it is good to go, well, go and test it and let me know how you feel. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
It's that fear of the fear, if you like.
Definitely. But I think also that sort of fear of the future and that constant worry is also a symptom of a general level of physical tension.
Absolutely.
Right. And the more, so I always teach my clients like techniques they can use for themselves, relaxation techniques. So the idea is that one of the reasons I say groovy is because it links to like a nervous system state that's more relaxed and safe and curious and playful. So if you want to get really serious into the vagus nerve, this is known as social engagement. So the more I can teach people techniques that they can use themselves to relax themselves, the less worried they're going to be about stuff that hasn't even happened, and the more they can actually be kind of in the moment and not, because I think a lot of this to do with psychological safety. So if the person doesn't feel psychologically safe and physically safe, they're constantly, part of how they try and attempt to get some sort of safety is just to be ready by imagining all the stuff that can possibly go wrong. So when it happens, they're kind of ready for it, right? I don't know if I mentioned this in our previous conversation about COVID, but I was on Twitter, and John Ronson is quite a famous writer who's written like movies and books and stuff. The Men Who Stare at Goats, and various other books about psychology. And he tweeted and said, it's really strange. Like, I have suffered from anxiety all my life, but I feel oddly calm during this pandemic. And I said to him, I tweeted and said, probably because you've rehearsed a lot of this stuff in your head, and you probably rehearsed worse in your head. So when you probably thought about zombie apocalypses and all sorts, and now this pandemic has come, and you're kind of ready for it because your mind has been imagining much, much worse.
Yes.
And I think it's a similar kind of thing with people who suffer from anxiety. I think they're so frightened. They have probably had one or two really bad shocks that they haven't seen coming, and then their mind, then their system is constantly worrying about stuff, so they'll never get shocked again. Unfortunately, the price to pay is they're constantly anxious, but they won't ever have that massive shock again. That's a theory.
Absolutely. Well, it's the old saying, it's better to be disappointed than, plan for the worst and you might be surprised, But the problem with it is, of course, if you're constantly running these worst case scenarios of things that have never happened, it's a bit like going to the gym. The more you exercise the muscle of worry, the better you become at worrying. And I think sometimes the subconscious has made the mistake of being organized already and confusing that with holding on to emotion. Oh, I mustn't let go of this fear, because what if I'm taken by surprise? And it's like,
and like, unfortunately for people, kind of the more anxious, the more stress, more hormones you have, the more like inflammation in the body. There's some really interesting research coming out now. There's also the neuropeptides associated with emotions. So in fact, it actually contributes to like worse health and well-being. But how does the person snap out of it? And sometimes just knowing that rationally, oh, you shouldn't worry because it's bad for your health, that in itself isn't going to help somebody.
Oh, well, no. And if you're a worrier, what you do is then compound it. So you go, oh, I'm worrying. And I read somewhere I shouldn't worry because that's bad for my health. Oh, what if my health gets bad? Oh, no. Oh, no. And down the rabbit hole you go, rather than, again, it's
exactly.
I mean, it's good to know it, but knowing it isn't enough to change.
So there are obviously some basic tips that people can use to take care of themselves. So some very basics. I know you like to go for big long walks and stuff, and there's so there are certain things you like to spend time outside. So there are certain things that people can do to give themselves the best chance. There are certain behaviors that people can do that will help them get plenty of fresh air, try and get the best sleep they can. So do you have any things that you tend to advise your clients? Do you sort of do you get involved in that, or are you just sort of?
I mean, in general, just everything you just said, really. But
Yeah.
I would say it really depends on the person and how severe. I mean, that's the point. Yes, you can give tips, and I will come on to that. But it is about going back to what you were saying. You know, it's about reading that person. It's about understanding that person first. So obviously, if the person is stressed out from work, all right, the solution is mindfulness, yoga, taking breaks. Very often with that, I'm more interested generally in the beliefs that go with any pattern of behavior. So if someone feels that they can't stop working, going with the stress analogy, it's like, well, what's that about? You know, oh, I can't take a break because then people will think I'm lazy. And, you know, I've defined myself by being an achiever. Yeah. And is it possible to be an achiever and be relaxed? You know, so it's kind of challenging those beliefs there. In terms of simple activities, one of the things, if you're very analytical, I recommend is using apps or what I call the light and sound machine, which is very good for just getting you into a relaxed state without you having to do anything really. Because the trouble with, and I'm a bit like this because it took me a long time to get out of my head because I'm very head based. So when someone says, okay, think of nothing, I just relax. I'm like, okay, am I doing it? Am I doing it? Am I thinking of nothing? Maybe I'm thinking of nothing. No, I can't be thinking of nothing because I was just thinking. And you just get into that when you have something that kind of can guide you. So guided meditations, self-hypnotic audios are good. For me personally, walks are good, but you know, that can be any kind of physical movement is very good because two things really. You're moving your body, and when you shift your state, you change how you feel. When you deep breathe, you change how you feel. Obviously, taking deep breaths is good anyway, but remembering to do that. If you're doing exercise, you're forcing yourself to do that if you like. And of course, you know, things like being in nature, which, you know, we were taken away from with COVID, you know, we suddenly realized how important that is. I can hear the nature outside now. Can you hear the storms? Just me, there's massive wind going. It's being in that environment. So change of environment's good. Taking deep breaths, focusing on your state. I mean, the other one is just this, which is, you know, talking about state. You know, it's like, I can't do it with the camera. Hang on, where are you? It's like if you're down or stressed, you tend to be like, your body tends to be hunched. If you just shift your posture, put your shoulders back and take deep breaths in, it's going to change how you see the issue. Doesn't mean the problems in your life aren't there, but when you're in a state where you can handle it, it becomes easier sometimes. Yeah. Well, what would your top ones be?
That's really good. I like that, what you said. It's about a state where you find out that you're more resourced, as I like to say.
Yeah.
So one thing that I often say to people, and it sounds really silly sometimes, actually be silly and playful.
Oh, yes.
And like, so for example, I sometimes give people the homework of like doing something their inner child would like. So it might be, you know, like just sitting down and doing some drawing. It sounds really silly, but it's a way, because I think a lot of people have lost our, especially grown-ups, we sort of lost our creativity.
Yes.
And being creative and expressive is really fun. I found a really good book. It's called Your Inner Critic is a Jerk. And it's got all these ideas of being creative. And it's like, so you get like together with your friends or whatever, and you decide you're going to make the worst art ever. So basically that gives you like permission to just do bad. So it just sort of shuts down your inner critic and just play. And it might be just like, I don't know, something really silly, like just going for a walk and, you know, like you see kids, we just had storms here in London, you see kids like jumping in puddles. It might be something just like that, where you just kind of let yourself be silly and like do something your inner child likes to do. And it sounds a little bit woo, but it's actually really fun. And I think for a lot of us, it just helps us to actually be better grown-ups.
Well, I think, I mean, going to the trauma thing, I think if you've had childhood trauma, maybe you lost a parent, something like that, actually what happens is you miss that stage of growth. You never really got that play. So I find that a lot with people that have been traumatized at a young age. They never got to be a child. So
exactly. Now, and I or there's a so one of the things I'm trained in is systemic coaching, family constellation coaching, and there's very interesting dynamics that happen in families, especially when one of the parents is either physically or emotionally absent. Sometimes the children will try and take over, and that exactly what you say, they miss being a child. Now, funnily enough, many like entrepreneurs I know have actually had quite tough childhoods, where one entrepreneur, her mum used to basically have breakdowns. And so sometimes there would be nothing to eat except for the milk would have been delivered. So they would just have milk for a few days. And this person is like the most like resourceful person I know. But obviously there's an upside to it, but also there was a cost there.
Yes.
You know, and a lot of founders I know have had a similar kind of where literally they also decided, well, no one's going to take care of me.
Yes.
Like I need to rely on myself. Now, so that is, and it doesn't mean they don't have wounds. And often later on, when they're like grown up and they're sorted, those things can then be attended to.
Yes.
When it's safe. So we're getting involved in quite sort of deep psychological stuff about childhood wounds and trauma. But I think for all of us, this ultimately runs the show. And for many people I deal with as well, I think there's always a fear when they've had not kind of therapy that therapists are going to be obsessed with like childhood and stuff and like sex and all, and we're just going to go rummaging around in there and seeing what we can find. And you know, and I don't know, years ago, I don't know, you and I are roughly the same age, I think. Do you remember there used to be this this sitcom called Jacko?
No, I'm way too young. No, go on. I actually
you remember
don't.
it. No. So there was a therapist then. She was like some sort of counselor, and she would always go, "Any sexual problems?"
Yes.
And you just knew that she was just a nosy so-and-so.
Well, it's a stereotypical Freudian analysis.
So the thing, so when I will like work with people, as I will, if I get a hunch that there is something in the child that's related to the problem that they've come to me with, then we will explore that and we will go there. But I don't go unnecessarily rummaging around just because I'm, just for the sake of it. Well, and I think that's a common fear. I don't know if you found that too.
Yeah, well, again, going back to traditional therapists, the trouble is traditional therapists had a very like Freud, who's considered the father. He made a lot of mistakes, and one of the ones is everything was sexually based. And that was to do, I won't go into here, but that was to do with the client base he spoke to, and so he would taken a very small snapshot and generalized it to the world. Trouble is that if that's what you look for, that's what you look for. So rather than being your fear of let's do a fear of snakes, rather than it being because you once saw a snake on TV, which 99% of the cases it would be, or horror movie, or it's bad experience. Maybe if you're in a foreign country, they're going to try and make it sexually, and it's like, so it's not about, so it could be the issue could lie anywhere, but it's about tapping into that wider mind, the subconscious, whatever you want to call it, and letting those answers come out, rather than presupposing a set prescription of where you think you should be looking. Well, it must be your childhood. It must because you had A, B, and C, and rather than just looking at actually what it is. That's not to say the person always knows, or and things can come out as you work. But I think not having a preconceived idea of what it should be and just letting the client lead you is very important in certainly the work we do.
And the whole thing, like, it just has to be at a pace that's comfortable for them. And so that one of the features of like a trauma is that it's overwhelming and it's too much. So the whole thing about the therapeutic process is it needs to be in a way that's manageable. I'm not saying it's never confronting, but it has to be in a way done in a way so that the person doesn't get re-traumatized in the process either.
Well, I'm gonna talk about this in one of my videos actually.
Yeah.
If someone is having issue about not going somewhere, I would that would be a red flag as well, because if someone goes, I don't want to talk about my childhood, and you go, why? Because I've dealt with that, and it's like, no, if you dealt with it, you wouldn't care if you spoke about it, other than
exactly.
You really,
and you would be like, in my sort of analogy of the nervous system, you would be basically in social engagement. You would kind of be relaxed and feel safe and actually be quite curious about stuff.
Issue, blah blah blah. Yeah, it would be a much
but
more.
They'd be much softer about it. Whereas what you're talking about is this person is highly defended and defensive. And protective.
I can't go there because it's too scary. I mean, it's the analogy I heard used.
Go on.
It's an analogy I heard used. It's like going to the doctors and going, oh, don't touch that knee, it hurts. And it's like, well, that's the part I need to touch. It's a bit like that. It's like, if there's a pain point there, it's asking yourself, well, what is it that's stopping me from going there? If there was nothing to look at, it wouldn't matter. And often, one of my mentors had this question. He started, and I don't know if you should start a session this way, but he used to, and he'd go, what's the one question you don't want me to ask? And so and whatever answer they gave, they go, you just told me your biggest pain point,
That's a killer. That's a killer opening. Not for the faint-hearted.
No, and as you say, good rapport first, I would assume. But it is a powerful question to ask yourself. If you go, well, what's the one, or what's the one area I don't want to look at? What's the one thing I'm avoiding?
I remember years ago, I had a tapping session. This was like before I was even trained in it.
Okay. Yeah.
And I was filling in the form, and just filling in the form, was really challenging, because it was like, what's the one thing in your life that you wish hadn't happened? So basically that's a killer question, because that's basically going, what's your biggest trauma? Now I don't tend to really put that kind of thing in a form. So my first session with people, I just have a conversation, and in that conversation I sort of go, oh, so tell me about this, and to them it feels like a natural conversation, but what I'm actually doing is I'm taking a case history, and I'm just going and finding out what I need to find out, but it's not done in a way where I sit there with a clipboard, but it's a much more natural way. But I get to find out what I need to find out.
Yes.
And then,
Karen.
So that's how I like to roll. For sure.
And I think that sometimes that is the best way. That is when you get the answers. Because sometimes when clients don't think their session started, they're more relaxed. And then the second, or after the session, but the second go, so let's begin. And then they're putting that guard on, But and it's interesting, but I will point out, your body's tense. Tell me about what just happened there. And again, it's often that whatever you want to call it, that protective part, that anxious part, trying to fight, trying to go.
So you and I are probably both. We notice like a little intake of breath, a little sigh, a little shift. Just a little bit where their voice cracks, where they talk about something, and you just know that you've got a zinger, and then you can you can deal with it. And you can actually, that can be done in quite a playful way as well. Yeah. Where you go, oh, I noticed this, You must do that as well.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And as we said at the beginning, so much of what people give away, they don't realize, and it's not that oh, that's good, but it's just that so much of our emotions, our beliefs, our patterns are subconscious, so we're not aware of them ourselves, and I say that includes us. We often need people outside of ourselves to help us, because although we have all these skills, sometimes it's hard to see yourself from a different perspective.
I've likened it to you can't tickle yourself,
Yes. Yeah.
It's and sometimes you need someone else to see that. So I have a colleague who we help each other and we do sessions with each other. You and I, we've talked about doing it, but I don't think we've ever done it yet.
Yeah, we should.
But we have talked about it. So because it is true that. And then, but then I'll give the people listening a little insight. So people like you and I who are well versed in all these techniques, we can be really, really difficult to work with sometimes, because we'll go, oh, here comes the sigh, because it's like I'll go, oh God, he's doing this on me.
He's doing that, or first. Oh, I saw what you did there. That was really good. And it's like, thanks. I'll have the critique at the end. Can you get?
But it's like it can be really, really difficult for us to sort of like completely lie back.
Yeah.
And like be the word submissive isn't quite the right word, but basically to be lied back and not have that part of us that's a therapist kind of like noticing, going, oh, he did that technique on me. Oh, I wouldn't have done that. Oh, he let me get away with that one. And it because there's a part of you, there's your sort of active part that's like, looking to see what the other person's doing.
Yeah. Well, again, the keen learner, I would frame it slightly different. The keen learner is, I mean, sometimes it's ego and competition.
Yes.
Going, are they any good? Yeah, I think I would have done it better.
Oh,
but
much better.
But sometimes it's the learning part and going, oh, that was a good question. I should use that. And then you think you're in training mode rather than
exactly. You shouldn't be in training mode. But it's a difficult one for sure.
Yeah. And again, going back to it, that's my issue with people that are therapists. Or even people that are trained in the stuff. It's like, I'm going to charge you double. Same reason. It's like they're gonna know too much, or they think they know it, or they'll try and a doctor trying to diagnose themselves. Rather than
and it is like, or like. So if, say we were working together and you would be going down a certain avenue and I'd be going, oh God, that isn't where the problem is. You need to be looking there. You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, that is a good one with very experienced clients that are coaches themselves, which is the one or therapists or whatever, I'd often ask and go, so if a client came to you with this issue, what would you say? I mean, I'd say it in more depth than that. What would you say to them? And that actually that can be helpful to tell them, oh, so you already know where to go then.
Well, have you seen that video, the Stop It video?
Yes.
Very famous. Yeah. Just stop it.
Just stop it. Yeah. It's 5-minute session. Yeah. Just stop it. A person like that, you go crazy keep thinking that way. Stop it.
Just stop it.
There is a place, and again, there's a place for that. It's like, is it that you need to dig deep? And there are a lot of things you do need to dig deep on.
Yeah.
And there's too many people just going, oh, I'll just think happy thoughts and that, and you're trying to suppress it. But
so I've got a question for you.
Go on.
So if somebody has a problem and they're looking for a therapist or coach to help them, what are some top tips for them to look out for when they're looking for a therapist or a coach? Because there are lots of them out there. So the person goes on Google and like, what would you say is some good top tips?
I was just about to ask you that question actually.
No way.
So that gave me time. What are my top tips for look? Well, I mean, I think, as much as I have my preferred methods and, what works for me and what I think work for my clients, doesn't mean it's for everyone. So I think finding a method or methods that work for them and finding someone you connect with. I will say that the majority of my clients aren't people who have never done any therapy before for whatever reason. So, that maybe skewer me a bit, because in the terms of everyone I've ever seen hasn't got, not everyone, but, hasn't got a permanent result from counseling. But then the people that haven't come to see me.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think the most important is finding someone you trust. And for whatever reason that is. And for some people, that'll be their qualification. Some people, that'll be their manner. Some people some people are very softly spoken. Some people are very direct. Some people are even, like we talked about this last time, provocative. They'll actually, challenge you. So, I mean, if they have videos, if you can see their work or look at their reviews, that would be one thing. Check out their website. That's another. So yeah, I really think it's an individual thing. I would definitely say someone that doesn't just have one method though, because otherwise they just every problem is what's the saying, person with a hammer sees every problem as a nail, you know. So they have to try and fit it into this box or this belief system. So someone who has a flexible approach would always be my advice. And someone who, for me, certainly for things like phobias, trauma, anxiety, something that has practical applied strategies that aren't just intellectual but will actually work on the emotional level. What would be your top?
So yeah, I think I agree with you. Like, find someone that you feel safe and comfortable with. Because having this kind of work can be incredibly can be challenging, and you're very vulnerable as a client. So really try and find someone that you feel comfortable with. If there's any alarm bells, if you feel uncomfortable in the initial chat, or if you feel that the person is really is like my way or the highway kind of thing, I think that would be a bit of an alarm bell. Ideally, personal recommendation is always really good. So if a friend of yours has had help from this person, that's always, you know, that's always a good sign. Definitely, I would say someone who has a range of techniques at their disposal. Not necessarily someone who's like done 300 different things.
You don't want to be a jack of all trades.
No.
They did a hour course in this. You want them to know the stuff well as well.
Yes, exactly. But then I think the kind of the connection and the rapport is key. So there's a lot of people saying, from a marketing point of view, that like a coach or a therapist should just specialize in one thing. And I know, for example, like I've done a lot of work with public speaking anxiety. You've done a lot of work with flying, fear of flying. But that doesn't mean that you and I can't do other things, right?
Yes.
And so you and I are both, I think, pretty versatile. So, certainly, go on.
But I will say a therapist who, so we still specialize in fears, phobias, anxiety, trauma, stuff
exactly.
Like that. We still have I think when someone goes, I can do everything, then they're not going to be dealing with people day in, day out, and they're not perfecting their craft as much as if they're dealing with a key area or a key type even, you know.
Definitely.
So I think someone who not is very narrow, that is versatile, but has a particular area they work in. So as you say, if you need relationship issues, someone who generally speaking works in relationships day in, day out is going to be more equipped to do it than someone who deals with relationships once every 3 months.
Exactly. Generally speaking. No, that's very true. What's your view on so often I will work in packages, but I tend to let people like have a session, because it like I'll tend to say to people, right, we can do the first session, like the 1.5, like an hour and a half one, where we will work really in depth on the problem, and you can get a taste of what it's actually like. So what about you? How does that work for you? Do you like for people to sign up to a package without having, obviously you have your initial conversation, right? How does it work for you?
How it works, so people, for me, they'll go on the website, they'll fill in the form, and we have a 30-minute consultation. That's free. Now, the reason I do that is so they can check that I'm right for them, and they can ask me any questions, and I can check they're right for me. Because I don't want to work with someone I don't think I can help. And there are some people that I think, actually, you're better going somewhere else. That's not quite my area, or whatever reason, you know. So that's the first thing. Then we would make a decision from there. So, you know, go away and think about it. Okay, start with one session. Majority start with one session. Some people will just go, I know I need to book several. So
yes.
But obviously, you know, it gives you a better, once you've had a half an hour conversation, it gives you a better idea, but it's only when you work with a person that you'll truly going to know what it's going to take.
Exactly.
But, you know, I mean, certainly with straightforward phobias, there's a lot of times where they come for one session and don't need any more as well. So it really depends, but that does depend on the issue, which is why I want the phone call. Because even with something like flying, the idea that flying is one issue, and that's how people talk, oh, I have a fear of flying. Oh, me too. But, you know, fear of flying can be fear of heights, fear of being trapped, fear of crashing, fear of movement, fear of the fact you'll freak out. And they're all very different causes. So someone who has a fear of loss of control, that may be a byproduct of an anxiety issue. And depending on what that is, that could be a several sessions work, or it could be 10 minutes work. And so it's important to get very clear on what the issue is before I give an idea of time frame, I think.
Yeah.
What about yourself?
I will usually have that first session. I'll do like a 15-minute chat, and then they can book the first session with a view to like, booking a package basically. But I like getting somebody, having a chat is fine, but you don't really know what it's like to work with someone until you've actually worked with someone.
Absolutely.
And that goes, like you said, it goes both ways as well. And the last thing I want to do is like book somebody who isn't going to get the value. There's no, if they're not a good fit for me for whatever reason, then that it just isn't going to work. There used to be this some coach in America, she'd say, when you first like start, you just think, I'll take anybody with a credit card and a pulse, right?
Yeah.
And you and I both know that for our sort of like reputation as well, like we want satisfied, happy clients.
Yeah.
We don't want to work with people that we can't help, who would be better served going elsewhere.
Absolutely.
So
and it's also having people that that you could advise them to go, okay, well maybe actually you could talk to my colleague or my friend,
go and see Chris.
Yes, or vice versa, of course. Yeah. I mean, that said, I do get results, like I say, where a lot of other people have failed. But again, that's not to say, and actually clients, some worst clients, that's unfair, but people who put too much pressure and go, right, you fix me. I don't want that, because that's a very much they're disassociated from the process.
Was it you that said that you had someone that had been to loads of different people and said, right, everyone else hasn't been able to fix me. Now it's your turn to not be able to fix me. Do you remember? Was that you that said that?
Well, it's a saying that goes around. I haven't had exactly like that, but there's a couple of the people that, go, I've been to this guy and I've been to this guy. And and it's like, well, why would I want to be your 50th failure? Now, that said, my question is, when a client comes to me and goes, I've done CBT, I've done hypnotherapy, I've done this, I've done that, I would always ask, what did they do? So like hypnotherapy, for example, there's so many styles. So it would be important to know, sometimes they'll tell me what they did and I'll go, not that the therapist was good or bad, but what they probably missed is this. And so I would explore that with them. So it's not to say that just because someone's done lots of therapy, hasn't worked, that they're necessarily a problem person. It could just be that they haven't found the right issue. But someone who's definitely coming with the attitude of, you fix me and I can prove how significant my problem is, they've got strong secondary gain. And I'm not saying it can't be worked with, but it's about treading very carefully on, so I'd certainly point out to the person, it's like, look at the pattern you're running. Is this, I'm not here to do battle with you. I'm here to work with you. And
exactly.
So it's noticing.
Interesting. Interesting. How is it different, like working online to like working in person?
So this is a question I get asked a lot, actually. And I think, if people are far away, I mean, recently it's all been online up until a few weeks ago for me. And people go, well, should I travel all the way from Yorkshire and come and see you? And it's like, there's some advantages between being face to face. Again, some people are more comfortable on video than others. It depends on the person. Some of the processes that I would normally do to a person, like I'd need to physical contact or whatever, I have to teach the person how to do it. The advantage is they then have it, like you were saying, they have a tool that they can take away. So, I mean, other than probably slightly quicker rapport face to face, but I don't think there's anything that can't be achieved over video. I don't know what your feelings are on that.
I would agree. I still think there is no substitute for being like right in the room and
the human contact.
The human contact. I think there is something that happens with the nervous system that's called co-regulation, where our nervous systems kind of settle together. And suddenly we can do a lot to build rapport over Zoom, but it's not the same as being in a room with someone. It just isn't. It just genuinely just isn't. So there are also little cues that I can pick up, like those little micro cues that we talked about earlier on, that are easier to pick up in the room.
I would agree. And on that, so definitely if someone is going to do a session on video, it's good to have decent lighting, and because the more grainy the picture, the harder it is for us to read the patterns of, and get such a, you know, maybe things that we pick up on a lot more.
Definitely.
In the room. I mean, I did have a client recently, that said, who was going to travel to me, and then because of COVID, we decided to do it virtually. But they had issues about traveling anyway. So actually they were going to come, they said it was better because they would have come into the session more hyped up because of the traveling, rather than already being in their safe space, their home. So it again, generally, I think you're right. There is something that happens face to face, but there are some people who video is actually more comforting, you know, at least to start with.
Definitely. I mean, also, like, so when I'm helping somebody with a speech, for example, I've got a massive consulting room, and I get them to walk around it.
Yes.
And I get them to like do different things, and I get them to like sort of pace up and down while they're doing their speech, and I get them to like even stand, like, you know, or sometimes I pretend like a chair is the stage, and I get them. So we move around the room a lot more, and we have like a little change of pace and a change of scene. So it's very different than both of us sitting down and looking at a screen.
Yes, you definitely engage the somatic that way, movement.
I definitely do that more. But at the same time, it's enabled me to like work with people who, like right now, if I'm working with somebody in California, which is working, you know, really well. And of course that would not be normally an option. But my preference is definitely to work. I think I've got a friend who came up with a brilliant idea for speaking, and he calls it like a hybrid. So he thinks a lot of conferences are going to be actually, some people are going to be in the room and some are going to be beamed in. And I think a combination of the two is actually quite good.
Yes.
So where you have some Zoom sessions and some in person, I think that's a nice combination too. That's a nice, so you can have a few like Zoom check-in ones, and then a few like really intensive like ones where you really
absolutely
do.
Well,
I mean, especially with some of the eye movement techniques that you and I use as well, they are just so much more effective face to face. That's my honest opinion.
You can do the eyes, but it's not as good, not as effective. So I would emphasize different processes to remove it. But I think you're right. I mean, I think, you know, I mean, I do get calls from all around the world, so a lot of my work is over Zoom, and even before lockdown. And you know, sometimes I had people go, like I had one from, I think it was Germany, and he goes, okay, so we'll do one over Zoom because I'm flying to England, and then I can fly to England and see you for a second session. And so we did it over Zoom, and he flew to England. And that happens a lot because people are scared of flying. They're not going to fly to see me. And though I do a service where I fly to them, that is, you know, that tends to be for the celeb clients. And he gets to me and I go, okay, so, you know, second session. I go, so, you know, where you're at? Like, because I'm fine. Flying's great. You fixed me. I didn't fix him, but, you know, that's how he said it. You fixed me on the first session. I'm like, why did you come then? He's like, shake your hand, say thanks. I was like, all right. Anything you want to work on? Let's grab a coffee, you know. And so that was a great example of, you know,
nice one. Speaking of, I know we were going to talk about a few client case studies, celebrity clients. I know you've worked with some people that you can actually talk about within reason. So do you want to?
Well, I can name drop. I don't want to talk about the process necessarily, but go on. What specifically would you?
Do you want to? Why do you name drop? Why not?
Well, no, I've worked with. I mean, I've worked with a whole range of people, from celebs to musicians to journalists. I've done quite a few interventions to, you know, to right through to students. I don't know why students are the bottom of the list. I didn't mean that, you know, whatever. I'm just saying a whole range of different people in different walks of life. but you'd be surprised how similar they are. I think. I mean, that's what I'd say. That you know, a fear is a fear. You know, and
Yeah,
because
they're just people.
Yeah, and just because you're an actor that's used to, you know, standing on stage making millions doesn't mean you don't have the same issues, if not bigger, than somebody else. And
Yeah.
I think that's the issue. We think somehow our problems, when we have them, you know, oh, but no one else understands, because people don't sit in the pub and talk about them. And they are, well, like, it's just, and that's the common one. Clients come to, well, it's just so irrational. Well, yes, it's an irrational phobia. That's the full title. You know, what do you expect? It's not logical. You didn't sit there and go, one day, you know, what would be great is if I had a fear of spiders. I think that would be good. No one did that, you know. No. It's not a rational thing. So, and it's just realizing that I think everyone goes through it. But, I mean, do you have a specific sort of case study you'd like to talk about?
So I did one that I really loved was working with somebody who's she's a reasonably good professional speaker. Mm-hmm. And she's a conservationist. She's like a badass, right? She's pretty fearless. Like, she flies this micro light plane, and she followed these like Arctic swans from like Russia to England, 3,000 kilometers. She's total badass. But she was doing a TEDx talk, and she's a pretty good, like, experienced speaker as part of her like campaign. She has to get people involved in her mission. But she was giving a TEDx talk, and various things went wrong. She was tired. They'd moved the table with the water. There was a squeaky bit on the stage. And then the lights came on and they were super bright. And basically she went to speak. And as you know, with TEDx talk, they just start recording. Yeah. And everyone's watching. And then they put it out associated with your name. So what happened with her is her mouth got so dry that her lips stuck to her cheek, and she literally couldn't get the words out, and she had to stop. She couldn't speak, and because they moved the water, she had to leave the stage, squeaky, squeaky. And basically, and she had to stop and start 3 times. Walk of shame,
as you call it, yeah. Go on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so after that, she developed like a pretty strong fear of basically reignited her stage fright. And so we worked together, and we did, I think we did like one big long session, and like an hour and a half, 2 hour session. And then basically after that, she gave an opening keynote at London Excel Centre to 700 veterinary surgeons, and they absolutely loved it. Yes. And then after that, she was made a UN ambassador and gave a speech to 3,000 people at the UN in India. So that was like, I was like so chuffed for her, because she has such a cool mission, and this fear was just basically causing her anxiety, and it was stopping her on her mission. Yes. So many times people I work with, they're not necessarily people who love the limelight, but they just have to do it as part of their mission. And this fear is stopping them and causing them suffering. And so it's amazing to be able to help people like that. So that one, I was so chuffed. I was just so happy for her. I was delighted. And for her to give me a public testimonial was amazing, because as you and I both know, very often we can help people. And then because of confidentiality, quite understandably, they don't want anyone to know that they had a problem with this thing. Yes. And so it becomes difficult for us to tell other people what we can do. So because there's an embarrassment associated with it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I mean, one of the things you're talking about there, which is all phobias, is the generalization, which is, I've had one bad experience. The mind goes, avoid this, it equals danger. And then it's running that pattern all the time in future.
Exactly.
And it's limiting people's lives. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of those where people have had, I mean, one of the most interesting is just where the change happens very fast, when you find that trigger, and suddenly they can go from fearing this thing like flying to suddenly, you know, loving it. So many, actually, I have quite a few videos and testimonials of those where people have gone, I hated it, and now I can't wait. You know, it's so great. And it's just to do with what we link pain and pleasure to. Mm-hmm. you know, it's the the Pavlovian response, or the Little Albert experiments, which we've talked about before. So
yeah. So so what about you? Do you want to give me an example of
so many.
I know.
I mean, there was one where I think one of the ones that really stuck with me was just where someone had come to me for something unrelated, and I actually can't remember what that issue was related to, but we'd spent the session working on it, and it's like, oh, by the way, I'm flying tomorrow and I'm scared of turbulence, and I hear you do a lot of flying work. I was like, yeah. She's like, we've got 10 minutes left of the session. I was like, okay, well, there's lots, you know, all the things I've talked about, you know, getting the set, you know, finding the secondary gain, working on the triggers, blah, blah, blah. 10 minutes, I couldn't do any of that. So I just did what's called anchoring, or stimulus response change. You know? So what it is, when we have, like I talked about Pavlov's dog, you know, when we have negative associations, we smell a smell, it takes us back to being at grandma's. We hear a tune, it takes us, good or bad. Taste, smells trigger us all the time. Now, if we link enough positive to something, we can change how we feel. So I said, all right, think of your best kiss. The woman singing her best kiss, and I condition it. Okay, think about turbulence, and then I build it, build it, build it. Okay, think about turbulence. Okay, build that. Fire them both, and what happens if the one's stronger than the other? It cancels it out. Now, again, if that's presupposing there's nothing holding it up, the subconscious beliefs, whatever. So I get a call a couple of months later. She goes, yeah, I'm just waiting in the airplane. Yeah, I'm thinking about turbulence. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, you know, we spent 10 minutes on it, lots of things we didn't cover. Come back in for a second. She goes, no, you don't understand. It's like, I get so excited when I think about turbulence now. So that always stuck with me as, you know, like a prime example of just pain and pleasure. You know? Yeah, so the mind learns very fast, and yeah, get enough pleasure, you can create that trigger positively. Get enough pain, you create that trigger negatively. So
turbulence.
Yes. So I don't know if it would be a Harry Met Sally moment on that plane, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's good. I mean, yeah, why not? You know, that's it. And you know, there are lots of. I mean, the simpler version of that is the reframing, which is just like when people think about turbulence, they're like, well, what meaning are you giving it? Oh, meaning it's unsafe. All right. Well, what if, you know, that movement could also be skiing, could also be surfing. You know, there's lots of times you'd have that movement and it would be pleasurable. So what's the difference in your mind between the two? And yeah, and you can go into the facts and figures about the fact that turbulence doesn't bring down planes, but that very rarely.
No, your nervous system, when basically when the plane drops, your nervous system is going to go, whoa, this feels out of control.
So it's changing that association to what it means. Exactly that, changing that nervous system response. Yeah. So yeah, that was a good one. But there's, I mean, yeah, there's so many where people have just gone from, you know, just incredible fear to loving things, and, you know, doing things that they never thought possible.
Yeah.
There's one that really, I mean, it kind of one of the reasons I've got a lot of work with flying. Many years ago, I did this video. It's like the 7-minute cure. And in fairness, I had worked with this girl before, so I knew what sort of processes might work for this. So we do this, and she goes from having this fear of flying for like 20 years, and in 7 minutes it changes. And to start with, she goes, oh, I did a sort of catch up with her a few months later. She's like, yeah, I find flying boring now. And it's like, that sounds bad, but it used to be terrifying, and I'll take boredom. But actually then over, I think we followed up with her sort of 3-4 years later. And then she's going, oh, now I actually love it. So it goes from fear to indifference or boredom to, oh, interest and intrigue. So, you know, sometimes those things, although the change was instant, the meaning kind of evolved over time. So.
Very interesting. So something just popped into my head. So I know that often when people have a problem, they really get angry with themselves.
Yes.
Because they kind of just hope they can just be angry and pull themselves, they can pull themselves together. Yeah. How do you deal with that anger? So one of my mentors talks about this attachment, so that the anger of the problem of like why they're so scared of public speaking or flying or whatever is actually adding extra tension.
Yes. So, I mean, that's, I think, the issue. I think certainly type A personalities are used to, type A, you know, it's the person, high achiever, go, 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 go. They're used to going, have a problem, smash through it. And that's great.
Yes.
If the problem is, you know, whatever, you're, you know, oh, okay, we need to get this piece of marketing out. I don't know.
Yeah.
Whatever. With emotions, it's the exact opposite of that. So the more indifferent you can be to how you feel, the easier it gets. So it's like this. Must be anxious. What if I'm anxious? Oh my God. See, now I'm anxious. Well, yeah, because you just were anxious. If you went, maybe I'll be anxious. Maybe I won't. Life goes on. Now I'm talking about an intellectual level, but basically, if you do that on the emotional level, then what will happen is your brain will go, doesn't really matter. Like you're not giving it the same significance. And, you know, the analogy I would use is, it's like when people go into a yoga class going, right, I'm going to be the best at yoga. Dig deep and be great at, that's not how you get good at yoga. It's the opposite. It's like letting go of the expectations. And so it's really teaching the person what context, I would say. The thing is, going back to what I was talking about before, and I think I've mentioned this, everything we do is meeting a need on the subconscious level.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that person on the subconscious level has learned, this is how I solve problems, then their brain hasn't learned flexibility. So they're using a hammer for a nail, you know, like the therapists who only have one way. Their brain only knows one way to tackle problems. And it's not necessarily always about getting rid of that, because that pattern of thinking serves them, but it's realizing that it's context specific and going, all right, so in 10% of life, that approach may be useful. Now it's teaching your subconscious mind other ways of behaving. So it's like going to the ice cream stall and only picking vanilla. They only have vanilla. I can only have vanilla. Okay, go to the ice cream stall. You have 100 flavors. All right. What would be the best approach in this moment? What would be the best approach in this moment? And so it's not taking anything away. So they're not losing that thing that they think gives them drive or even protection. It's giving them, oh, but how many other resources can you create? So that tends to be how I look at that and work with the person when they have those issues. And that tends to be easier, because sometimes they're terrified of losing the very thing that might go back to identity. But that's who I am. I'm Mr. Go-getter.
Oh, exactly. Right. I was talking to a client about this yesterday, about the inner critic. And it turns out that research has shown that people who practice self-compassion actually have higher levels of motivation getting things done than people who don't. But for most of us, our inner critic and calling each other ourselves all sorts of names inside our heads. I've got that book behind me, What to Say When You're Talking to Yourself. So it's all about self-talk. Yeah. And when it comes to a problem, like you say, people that you and I work with very often, high achievers, so they're used to powering through stuff. And but there comes a point where that doesn't work when it comes to a fear or phobia where they're getting triggered on a not rational level. But for them to let go of that inner critic and still not lose their drive, that becomes the balance and the tension for my client that I was talking to yesterday. Yeah. And I think lots of people don't really get that distinction.
Well, again, often the subconscious belief is anxiety makes me better at my job. And going back to the flying example, I'm sure I might have told you this one before, but the one I love, and I put this in my book, which will be out soon, which is just plug that.
Hashtag shameless plug.
Well, yeah,
very
shameless
subtle,
plug. We should have an alarm, shameless plug. But no, it's because I was reading it through today and it reminded me of that story, which is, so imagine if you're scared of flying, or if you're indifferent to flying, and you go and talk to the pilot, and he's holding the controls, he's shaking, and he's sweating profusely. And you go, well, you're a bit anxious because, I want to make sure I do a great job of flying the plane. You'd be off that plane in a second. We know instinctively that you're not better when you're nervous or anxious.
Yeah.
Subconsciously, it's that, I need to be on high alert.
Yeah.
And again, so it's educating the emotional mind that you can achieve and be relaxed. And
there is a really fascinating. So I've studied a huge amount of sports psychology.
Yes.
And there's a brilliant book by somebody called Bob Rotella who works with top golfers, and he talks about being invited to watch a open heart surgery, and the surgeon, they're like, they got the radio on, they're sort of chatting, just making small talk with the nurses while they're doing this operation. And because having that atmosphere enables them to do the best possible job.
Yes.
They're not going, oh, like, you know, got to make sure I don't mess this up. Oh, like, if I cut this person's going to die if I do it wrong. There is a way of like making sure that you are relaxed, so that part of you that knows exactly what to do can take over.
Absolutely. And I think there's one of my mentors talked about this. He said there's a zen coffee carrying, and he said if you're carrying your cup of coffee and you're going, I mustn't spill it, you're going to spill it. And if you're carrying a cup of coffee going la 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 la, you're going to spill it. And there's a middle ground. You just I know it's there, I'm aware of it, but it's not my full focus. Then that's the zen like coffee carrying. And he's saying that, you know, that's exactly what you're saying in life, whether it's surgery or sports psychology. I mean, that's the other analogy I use. You know, athletes, they're incredibly focused on winning that race, 100%. Yet they have massage and psychology, you know, sports psychologists, all to get them in the mindset to be as relaxed and as calm as possible. So they win that race by being good and training and doing all those things. But if they're tense, they ain't going to win that race.
Yeah.
So, and it's a bit like that in life.
Definitely. I think I heard a really good one the other day. I know this guy, Chris Cook, who was like a Commonwealth gold medalist, and him and his sports psychologist worked out that all he had to do was to be able to swim 2 lengths of the pool. It was 100 meters as fast as possible. That's his only job. Not even necessarily winning, but just to do that. So and they looked at his training schedule, and they were like, saying, so why as part of your training are you doing bench pressing and pressing up? They literally just cut everything out of his schedule that wasn't directly helping him to do his 2 lengths of the pool.
Faster,
and it's become actually you can actually look at this in business as well, so where you have certain metrics that you follow, because you and I both know that you can't guarantee winning the race, but you can just do your bit.
Yes.
Right? Because anything else might happen. And apparently in the event when he did his race, he actually, I think he sort of, as he was going into the water, he sort of slipped. But because he knew exactly what to do and the process, he still managed to win. Like, and it didn't, like a little change like that didn't put him into a panic. And I think this is part of what you and I help people with, is that we get them into a point so they are so steady and focused that if a little thing goes wrong, which it's bound to, like my client with the water change and the squeaking and you know, the TEDx speaker. So lots of things go wrong, and then people can get like thrown off course, especially when they're tired. So
absolutely
working with a performance coach can actually help them get into a zone where they're not going to get thrown off.
Look, I don't think it's just sport. I mean, sports is a metaphor for life. And I think, you know, I mean, you know, well, we couldn't know. Again, it's a Facebook joke. Who had to be locked at home on their dream board? You know, it's like you couldn't have anticipated this. You know, this hasn't happened. Yeah, the lockdown. Hasn't happened in 100 years, so longer than that, since the flu pandemic of Spanish flu. You know, so it was not on anyone's radar. But then it's so you never know the card you're dealt, you know, the hand you're dealt, but it's how you play the hand. You know, what do you do with it? As you say, do you slip? All right, what do you do then? You win the race. You swim. You just swim. If you're set back, is being locked down going to set you back emotionally, financially? For most people, not everyone, as you say. In fact, some people with social anxiety were a lot better off. But it's okay. What can I do? This is my starting position. What do I do from here, and how can I handle it? Exactly. And so it's never expecting that there's not going to be problems, and it's not constantly worrying about problems. It's just having that, I guess, emotional resilience to be able to handle them. And
exactly.
That's I think, you know, the advice we give our clients.
Definitely, and that's what we try and help them to achieve.
Absolutely.
And then also, if they do have a little blip, like I was talking to a client about this the other day, and he said, I'm realizing now that if I have a little wobble it's just like learning to ride a bike. It's just a wobble, and that you don't get completely like upset by a little wobble, and that you were able to put it into perspective. So I think a lot of our clients who are high achievers, they're not used to having wobbles.
No.
They're used to being...
Well, they're not used to being in things they're not in control of, like emotions, you know, because they're used to solving it all. And yeah, it's again, it's teaching them mental flexibility.
And they tend to be the people, you know, that have gone to the best schools, they've had the best results, they've gone to the best universities, they've got great jobs. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm no good at this thing. I'm having a problem here. And that feeling vulnerable, and then they, you know, then they hope, oh God, I hope nobody can see, and then they start to suffer in silence, and they try and avoid whatever the thing is. So they try and just pretend everything's normal for a while, and then they try and avoid it, and then usually there comes a point where they think, oh God, I better sort this out, and then they start Googling, oh, I need help with fear of flying, speaking anxiety, whatever it might be. And then hopefully find somebody that they can actually, you know, move forward, because you and I both know it's possible to get over these things.
Well, and it's not only possible, it's sometimes a lot easier than people, even other therapists would say it is, you know.
Yeah, definitely.
It's been a pleasure talking to you today.
It has.
Anything else you'd like to add?
I think there was going to be, there was no name dropping.
Next time.
Okay. I love this. I love making you squirm. It's so fun. Imagine if we were doing a swap therapy session, it would be even more fun.
Yeah.
Little in-joke, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, I loved your show reel that you sent me the other day.
That's cool. Well, that will be out
impressive.
Probably next week or so.
Very good. Well, then the ladies and gentlemen will know what I'm talking about then. There's some quite stunning client case studies in there, including some household names. So, well, thank you so much, Chris. I really enjoyed it. So if people want to get hold of you, what's the best way to get hold of you?
If you go to my website, christopherpauljones.com, and then so you can have a look around. Again, show reel will be up there probably. Various reviews, tips, various video tips and articles. And then if you want to book a 30-minute consultation with me, you go to the Clarity Call page, fill out your details, and you can pick a date. What about yourself?
So yeah, the best place is harleystreetcoach.com. I'm also quite big on LinkedIn, so please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm nearly up to 10,000 connections on LinkedIn. That's like my biggest platform. So they can go to my website, book a call. I'm actually in the process of changing over my booking system. But yeah, so just book a free call through there and have a chat and have a look around. And big news, I'm working on my very first lead magnet. So I'm working on a product so people can sign up to my email list. So that's something I'm working on. So I'm very excited about that.
And my Face Your Fear of Flying book should be out soon. So we're doing plugs. Face Your Fear of Flying book should be out in a couple of months. So that should be on Amazon, but I'll place it on the website when it's ready. So great stuff.
Thank you,
I will
Chris.
speak to you soon. It's always a pleasure.